I'm recording this video in order to introduce you to the second section of the class. We've just wrapped up the first section, Art as Spiritual Expression. You have explored in this section the ways in which art can be used to express spiritual beliefs, whether they be from ancient Mesopotamia, Renaissance Catholic practice, or contemporary anxieties about disease and motherhood. Art helps cultures throughout the world give form to big existential questions, questions about purpose and mortality, legacy, and interior life. In the course of this unit, we have already encountered the representation of the self and others. In other words, portraiture and self portraiture. For instance, the Code of Hammurabi that you see on your screen can tell us how the representation of a king and a god justifies that king's power to make and enforce laws, right? It's a portrait that describes the divine right of kings. It's a portrait, in other words, of a king in service of that king's political power. Some portraits so far have been about women. We've seen Jamie Bates Sloane's self portraits, which you see right above my head. Um, and women have often been excluded from power throughout much of human history. So they often had to make their own portraits to enter the historical record, as we'll see on Thursday. Portraits can be explorations of interior life, personal reflections, often because of those exclusions from power. And we saw Jamie Bates Sloane specifically using self portraiture to explore spiritual questions, right? So these categories are fluid questions about death and longing and mortality. In this section, representation of the self and others, we'll dive into portraiture in a sustained way, dive into representations of the self and others, and we'll always be exploring how are artists using the genre of portraiture to communicate a set of values, right? Values about power and culture, um, how portraits are used to bolster a political system or a political leader. And portraits won't always be straightforward. Art will be used, as we'll see in this section, to memorialize bodies, both through figuration, so traditional portraiture, a likeness, but also through abstraction. In these two artworks, which we'll see later on in this section, artists struggling to give form to trauma and loss, those ineffable experiences. We'll talk about the value of giving form to loss on a personal scale and also a kind of mass scale. So representing the body in a different way, and how memorials or artwork that memorializes might criticize the people and institutions in power. We will also discuss how the race or gender of either an artist or a sitter, their identity, their backgrounds, might impact the meaning of an artistic representation. We'll ask the questions, does art always humanize its sitter or elevate its maker? What kind of power dynamics are involved in making an image or in looking at an image, looking at a portrait? When were underrepresented groups acknowledged as participating in artistic practice? And how does making an image of something as contested as identity define what the categories of identity are? Here you're seeing a portrait of a woman, a patron of art, Madame de Pompadour, who we'll talk about on Thursday, and how she used art to break into institutions and power structures that were quite hard for women to make any inroads in. And then this pile of candy, this portrait of Ross in LA that you see on your screen also, this is a kind of contemporary portrait that really challenges the genre, a portrait of a person through an unusual material that is quite a moving memorial. So this is an exciting section, I think quite an accessible section since we're talking about human beings and their likeness, their representation. So I hope that you will enjoy. And today, after you watch this video, we'll be diving more into, um, we'll be talking about a king and a general and seeing the value of elegance, how elegance is strategically deployed in French art at the beginning of the 18th and 19th centuries, and how art is used as propaganda in service of political leaders.